As early as 10,000 years ago, Paleo-Indian hunter-gatherers had discovered what we call the San Antonio River and its lush valley. It's a small river, averaging about 45 feet across and rarely more than 10 feet deep. It rises from springs at the foothills of the Balcones Escarpment to the north. The river's headwaters are on what is now on the campus of San Antonio's University of the Incarnate Word.
The San Antonio River has been important for people along it for thousands of years.
The archaeological project that we're working on right now and have been working on for 3 to 4 years now allowed us to document that history of occupation. And what we know is that it started roughly about, at least we have evidence of villages going back at least 11,000 years ago, and that history of it continued until 400 or 500 years ago, and then eventually it stretched into modern times, of course.
The concept begins with the archaeological evidence that was excavated from the archaeologists during the River Improvement Project. And this evidence is quite provocative. It shows the hunting, the camping, the gathering, the journeys that people have taken and landed at the river, again, over 12,000 years.
It flows southeasterly for 240 miles to San Antonio Bay on the Gulf of Mexico. The headwaters of the river are part of the source of the River Archaeological District, listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Farther downstream in Brackenridge Park, and at various points downstream, are found campsites of Native Americans, not far from the bones of bison, mastodons, and giant horses that also wandered through.
We've been able to work on several archaeological sites stretching the 7.5 or so miles of the project. 2 in particular out of these sites stand out in my mind. One of them is located up in Brackenridge Park, and the other is located roughly about 1.5 miles behind us. In both cases, we've been able to recover remains of hearths or cooking hearths where people would have cooked vegetal matter, probably animal flesh, and these hearths date to roughly about 10,500 years ago. And then we've been also able to excavate several spear points made out of local church that would have been found along the river, and these spear points would have been attached to tips of darts, would have tipped darts, and those darts would have been thrown at things like deer, antelope, bison, and those date to roughly about 10,800 years ago. So between the hearts and the projectile points or spear points, those are the 2 oldest kinds of remains and that we find in archaeological sites we have found so far.
The Payaya Indians called the stream Yanaguana, which may mean refreshing waters. Tonkawa Indians, banished to Oklahoma before the Civil War, were seen in the Almas Creek Basin near the headwaters as late as 1928, as Tonkawas made return visits to collect mezcal beans for religious ceremonies. A small group of Spanish priests and soldiers, led by Domingo Terán de los Rios and Father Damian Massanet, was making its way from the Rio Grande to Spanish missions in East Texas when the men came across the lush headwaters of a river.
When the first explorers came through this area, they had missionaries with them. They also brought herds of cattle, and sheep and goats and hogs, and soon the cattle began to populate here, and there were a lot of cattle in the area, and so the ranchos that developed here had access to those cattle, and this was very important to them. The cattle fed the missions, the Indians in the missions, and it also fed the ranchers that were here.
The history here is well over 300 years old, and the Spanish considered this area in Texas between the Cibolo and the San Antonio River, as they called it El Rincon, which is the corner. And in their visits to other parts of the world, they consider this the best ranching country in the world. And that's what they did at south of San Antonio. And we have some documents that, there's ranches all along the river, and they were divided, and like these old Spanish ways, the Grants would always have access to the river. And that was the source of water, because there weren't windmills or ponds, and well, there were some creeks, but they're not full-time flowing creeks, but the river was always the source of water, and this is what the cattle needed.
Gene and I worked together quite a lot exploring the history in Wilson County, especially along the San Antonio River Valley. This is very important to us. Gene has more expertise than this than I do. I have written 2 books, though, that relate to the San Antonio River Valley and the missions especially.
Once the Spanish established the mission, it became a cornerstone of European settlement in this part of the world. And of course, Spanish missions, or any missions, are almost always located on a river. You've got to have a water source. Rivers provide fish and other foodstuffs. And in many cases, rivers were used for irrigation. The mission that moved to San Diego had tried irrigation at previous locations and had not been successful. And I'm not aware that they actually did any irrigation in Goliad. But as I say, the river still was an essential part of the mission. In the long term, the most important thing about the mission in Goliad was that it was on that mission's grounds that the Texas cattle industry began. The Spanish brought to Texas a certain kind of beef cow that had African roots by way of Spain, and it became, in this part of the world, the Texas longhorn steer. This was a magnificent animal, very large, the big horns. Its chief characteristics were that it could survive a considerable drought, it could eat anything, and the females were extremely protective of their calves. So with those longhorns, heaven help any wolf that tried to capture a longhorn calf. It was not going to happen. Since they are so self-sufficient, they just multiplied like mad, and the area between the San Antonio River and the Guadalupe River became a huge cattle growing area that was the lands of the mission. They provided the food for the mission, for the Presidio, and they also provided food for San Antonio missions and Presidios.
The San Antonio River was one of the most critical elements for the Spanish in terms of their ability to come into this area and colonize. The San Antonio River provided transportation corridors, and then also the river was critical in terms of the abundance of resources. When the Franciscans and the Spaniards came to the San Antonio River Valley, they found the basic natural resources that they needed in terms of where to go about starting to build and develop a mission complex. Plenty of wood, plenty of water, and then of course stone for building the mission churches. So as a piece of that, the San Antonio River was the critical element to a successful Spanish colonization in the San Antonio River Valley.
It was June 13, 1691. For Catholics, the feast day of St. Anthony of Padua. The Spaniards named the river San Antonio. Spanish missions in far east Texas were being threatened by the rival French Empire. A supply base was needed between those missions and Spanish settlements along the Rio Grande. On May 1, 1718, the settlement of San Antonio was established 2 miles from the densely wooded, boggy land around the headwaters, on the firmer and more open ground of San Pedro Springs, source of a tributary to the river, San Pedro Creek. Near the new military presidio, the priest established a mission, moved up from the Rio Grande, and renamed San Antonio de Valero. More than a century later, in a new location, remains of that mission became known as the Alamo. Several miles downstream, a new mission, San Jose, was established in 1720. 11 years later, 3 more missions, Concepcion, San Juan, and Espada, moved from East Texas to alternating sides of the river nearby. In 1749, a presidio and a mission were relocated to Goliad.
The river was key to the Spanish colonization of this side of Mission Espiritu Santo. Without water, the Spaniards and the natives, the mission wouldn't have survived, and they relied on the water and the river for their crops and for their livestock. Matter of fact, this was the third site of Mission Espiritu Santo, and when it was in Mission Valley, they used it more for irrigation of their crops. When they came to the San Antonio site here, the riverbanks were so steep, so it was really hard to irrigate using the river, which kind of led to them doing more cattle ranching. And this eventually became a mega cattle ranch here in Goliad at Mission Espiritu Santo. And so the river played a key role in how the mission developed and what they did here at this site, and in its success while it was active here.
Across the river from the mission, of course, was the Presidio. This was the military installation, and its functions were varied. It was obviously designed for defense. In this case, maybe defense against the French, but they never really threatened the area, but especially defense against the Indians, and not again so much the coastal Indians, but the Indians such as the Comanches and the Lipan, who would sweep down from the plains into this area. A community grew up around the walls of the Presidio. It was called La Bahia. It was the thriving community. It was pre-Goliad. It was there until the Texas Revolution, whenever it was basically destroyed. Because the Goliad Presidio was such an important center, and because of the community that grew around it, at the end of the 18th century, if you look at Texas population, about 50% of the population was in Bexar County, San Antonio. About 25% of the population of Texas was in the Goliad area. It was in the Presidio Bahia community and the ranches surrounding it. And the remaining 25% of the population was scattered throughout the rest of the state. So this was a very significant part of the Spanish system. Now, one of the ways that really ties into the river is that you've got what you might say two of the most important centers in Texas, Bexar County and Goliad. And obviously there would be traffic between the two. There would be soldiers moving back and forth. There would be priests. There would be administrative people. There would be couriers. There would be commerce. Commerce would be carried in Spanish two-wheel carts, carretas. And the route that they followed just simply parallels the San Antonio River from Goliad to San Antonio. And it was on the north side of the river and was one of the most heavily traveled roads in Texas during the latter part of the Spanish colonial and the Mexican period.
Presidio La Bahia there became the major frontier fort defending the coastal area. It is now the oldest standing fort west of the Mississippi River.
The relationship between the San Antonio missions and the river is one of hand in glove. You could not have the missions without the river. And because of the abundance of the resource, and when we go back and historically look at the San Antonio River Valley, the river provided so much in terms of just raw natural resources, and then because of that, there was an abundant indigenous population. So it gave the Spaniards more than ample cause to look at the San Antonio River as a source for building the missions because of that direct connection and relationship to the river.
The San Antonio River and its tributaries may have provided a plentiful supply of water to those along its banks, but seasonal lack of rain required some means to water fields within the broader valley. The solution in San Antonio was construction of gravity-driven acequias, or irrigation ditches.
The Spanish learned from the Moors the techniques in architecture of developing what are called acequias, or ditches, as a lot of people refer to them. We have found the acequia systems here in San Antonio to be just an incredible engineering feat in terms of how it gave the Spanish the ability to take water from the river, water their farm fields, and then return that same water back to the river again.
While the gentle flow of the San Antonio River could not support major industries such as those along rivers elsewhere in the country, Several small mills did flourish beside the river in San Antonio. The largest was established at the end of King William Street in 1859 by Carl Hilmar Gunther, whose Pioneer Flour Mill survives at that site and whose company has grown into a national food conglomerate. North of the center of town, the Alamo Mill opened in 1871. Part of its dam can still be seen in the riverbed. Two new breweries took advantage of the river not far away, but acequias could not be extended to the growing city, and polluted water was causing epidemics of cholera.
Over the years, it's obviously not this sort of navigable river. It's not this sort of industrial river that you'd see on the East Coast running lots of mills and things like that. But it's the source of our water. It's the source of why you could have agriculture here. The Spanish really knew how to use it to irrigate fields and to build irrigation ditches. They had this amazing irrigation system built for the city in the 1700s. And so it is our lifeblood. Since then, we figured out different ways of using it. Obviously, we have this big German migration that comes in the 1800s, and what a surprise, they start opening breweries because it's a great place, great water to make beer with. And in the sort of last 100 years, we've really figured out a way to kind of center the city around it in terms of recreational uses and using it downtown to really center development and to be the sort of centerpiece of the tourism industry, the visitor industry for San Antonio, which is about the third leg of our local economy.
The water went uphill to a reservoir, which can still be seen within the San Antonio Botanical Gardens. One pumping station was later used as a studio by the sculptor Gutzon Borglum when he was preparing models for his work on Mount Rushmore. But more water was needed than what the river could supply. George Brackenridge took over the San Antonio Water Company and from his home near the headwaters directed the drilling of artesian wells. In 1891, drillers downtown struck water that began producing 3 million gallons a day at a site still in use by the San Antonio water system. But as more deep wells caused the water table to drop, springs supplying the river also began to dry up. There was often no water in the river. Water-powered mills could no longer operate, and the barren riverbed, choked with weeds, became a public eyesore. By the beginning of the 20th century, citizens were urging that the San Antonio River be beautified as a park. Plans were proposed for a river walk. In 1913, the city dedicated not a walk, but a river park. National architectural critics praised city officials for their work. Although the San Antonio River often went dry, heavy rains could quickly fill the riverbed and overflow. When two floods came within 2 months of each other in San Antonio in 1913 and 5 people drowned, the city hired a Boston engineering firm to study the situation. In 1920, the firm recommended that the river be straightened, a dam be built at the mouth of Olmus Basin, and that a picturesque bend through the center of downtown be cleared of trees and its base paved to quickly carry floodwaters away.
One of the interesting things about the river is it's really an ephemeral stream much of the time because it is an aquifer-fed river. It starts here in San Antonio. It starts only a few miles behind me is the source of the water. So some of the time, during droughts and during the summer, we don't even have water. We have a really interesting system of getting water into the river during those periods. But if it rains, we go from a few cubic feet per second of water to 5, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 cubic feet of water.
A wave of protests blocked clearing of the bend, but before anything else could be done, a violent storm from the Gulf of Mexico struck San Antonio on the evening of September 9, 1921. It left flooding that drowned more than 50 persons and devastated much of downtown San Antonio and low-lying areas along Alazan and Apache Creeks. During the next few years, Olmus Dam was built and the river straightened as recommended. A cutoff channel kept floodwaters outside the picturesque bend of the river downtown.
Flood control has taken on many things to advance our community, to be able to allow it to develop and to grow, and to be able to do that in a way that has protected the citizens, both property and life. From the early stages of building the Olmus Dam to the north of downtown, that was the start of protecting the downtown of San Antonio. To later, the channelization of almost 30 miles of the San Antonio River to the south in order to convey floodwaters quickly out of the city to the southern portions of the river.
Construction of a ship channel from the Gulf of Mexico had helped Houston take the title of largest city in Texas away from San Antonio. Many residents of San Antonio long thought their city should have a ship channel too, one that would turn the course of the San Antonio River into a barge canal all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. On May 5, 1937, the Texas legislature created the San Antonio River Canal and Conservancy District, governed by a board of directors of Bexar County residents, to begin planning for the new canal. 2 years later, flood control was added to the district's duties. In the 1930s, San Antonio's Jack White was looking for ways to bring people to his Plaza Hotel beside the river park. He picked up on the Riverwalk proposal first made by Robert H. Hugman in 1929, and with the help of Congressman Maury Maverick was able to get federal WPA funding for the project. The Riverwalk was completed in 1941 and was dedicated with the first river parade of the modern era. But the Riverwalk got little use, and expected commercial development did not occur. Those strolling the narrow flagstone walkways were presented mainly with the unsightly backs of buildings. Crime became more frequent, and the Riverwalk was placed off-limits by the U.S. Army. In 1946, flooding south of San Antonio and beyond showed the need for more flood control downstream.
I remember my sister screaming, because my sister was about 1.5 years younger than me. So I was about 4.5. I think it was, I want to say that it could have been this month of September. But it's been such a long time ago. That they were pulling us out because the water was rising. And it had been raining, and so they were trying to save us because we were the smallest, and I remember seeing other people. But other than that, I know we were safe, and that's so I can live to talk a little bit about it.
Officials of the San Antonio River Canal and Conservancy District were finding that the cost of constructing a canal to the Gulf of Mexico was impractical compared with the economy of trucking shipments to the coast over improved highways. Plans for the barge canal were finally given up. As that discussion was ending, in 1953, the San Antonio River Canal and Conservancy District was renamed the San Antonio River Authority.
It was not until really the fall of 1955 that my husband and I, who were living in Dallas, made some very serious contracts with San Antonio. He was invited to come down to be interviewed to be the executive director of the Bexar County Medical Society. And we came down, and my uncle, who was C. Stanley Banks, a noted Texas attorney, invited us to have lunch on the river. We had lunch up at the old original Mexican restaurant on Soledad. And we had a nice lunch, but then after lunch, my uncle invited us to go down and walk along the river. As I have told all my friends, if it is possible to fall in love with a river, I fell in love with the San Antonio River. And I just thought it was a magical place. I just loved it. And I remember saying to my husband, now Sid, if they offer you this position, please take it. I love this place.
In 1961, its jurisdiction was expanded to the entire San Antonio River Basin, including not only Bexar, but also Wilson, Karnes, and Goliad counties, and the makeup of its board was changed to 12 elected members. Flood control became a primary mission. The River Authority supervised a major flood control project recommended in 1951 by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, including 31 miles of improvements along the river and its tributaries in San Antonio and 2 miles on Escondido Creek in Kennedy. It was during this time that the River Authority also began work on what would amount to 40 retention dam projects in Bexar and Karnes counties. While flood control remained a focal point of SARA's activities following the 1961 reorganization, the agency did initiate several new programs, including water supply projects, water quality studies, and the opening of 2 wastewater treatment facilities.
Well, you know, one of the things about the San Antonio River is that it has been a work in progress for many years. And right before Hemisphere, one of the things that was done was extend the river into the area that was going to be part of Hemisphere, the convention center area. I remember being on the prow of the cruiser when we cut the ribbon with Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez. That opened up the tourism and convention business to be completely linked to the river. And so that has been a tremendous source of city income. And then, of course, going on to there, all of the total economic development has expanded, and the convention and tourism business really has grown and grown and grown. We are one of the most important cities in the country in terms of that particular aspect.
Hemisphere, the World's Fair held in downtown San Antonio in 1968, included on its grounds what became a new convention center for the city, and also an extension of the Riverwalk. That made it easy for fairgoers to walk to the 2 new hotels along the banks. The hotels and the new convention business generated the pedestrian traffic needed to make businesses successful at the river level. New hotels and businesses opened along the river downtown. The San Antonio Riverwalk became, along with the Alamo, one of the top 2 tourist destinations in Texas. As management of environmental and conservation issues within the San Antonio River Basin became increasingly complex, in 1975, the San Antonio River Authority moved into new headquarters at 100 East Gunter Street beside the river in San Antonio. From this new facility, Sarah began providing laboratory analytical services and oversaw the expansion of Sarah's Upper Martinez and Salotrio Creek wastewater systems, which are still in operation today. Despite the flood relief provided by Olmus Dam after the flood of 1921 and other flood conveyance improvements after the flood of 1946, concern remained about the danger of flooding in downtown San Antonio. In 1987, a laser-guided tunneling machine began boring the first of 2 tunnels, 24 feet in diameter and about 150 feet below downtown San Antonio. The second $111 million tunnel project was completed in December 1997. Only 10 months later, a huge downpour sent as many as 3 million gallons of water a minute below the center of the city, preventing what would have been a disastrous flood.
The quality of the water in the San Antonio River 30 or 40 years ago was a lot different than it is today. When I started working here in 1987, I could go out to a location just downstream of San Antonio and look into the San Antonio River, and I would see black water, and it would be bubbling, and it was doing that because of the nutrient load that was coming in from an old wastewater treatment plant. Later on, probably about 1989, that plant was decommissioned, and Dos Rios water plant came online, and it changed the entire complexion of the water from that point down.
Well, of course, all water is recycled, but what we're talking about today is water that's been used by the citizens of San Antonio, transported to a wastewater treatment plant, treated to a high standard, and then returned back into San Antonio to either be water in the river, to be used for irrigation on a golf course, or to be used in a manufacturing process somewhere here in the city. San Antonio has the largest recycled water system in the U.S. In addition, we work with our sister electric utility, CPS Energy, or CPSE, and we provide water for use in their cooling lakes. We work very closely with CPSE and the San Antonio River Authority to ensure that we've maintained adequate environmental flow in the river.
Where we used to have really low areas of dissolved oxygen, actually for a long stretch of the San Antonio River, we've now seen that come back in a very short time to where it being the dissolved oxygen meets the standards for that water body. Point sources of pollution are those that you literally can point to. They're end-of-pipe discharges. So as an example, wastewater treatment plants are point sources. Non-point sources are those things that you really can't point to. You have water from a rain event that washes across property, hits a street or highway, and then washes into the stream. So where did that come from? There's no easy way to point to it and say, that's the source of this contaminant. The aquatic habitat in the San Antonio River watershed varies from stream to stream. In the upper portion of the watershed in Medina County, the population there is much lighter than it is here in, say, Bexar County, which is the 7th largest city in the United States. And the habitat there is more natural than what you would find in Bexar County. In Bexar County, we're trying to repair some damage to the San Antonio River habitat. There's currently a project that's ongoing to restore about 8 miles of the San Antonio River. Again, this is not going to restore it to its pre-development state, but it'll be a much healthier riparian and aquatic habitat than it has been. And as you move downstream, it's mostly rural. We have a lot of farming and mostly ranching going on. And the habitat in-stream is pretty good. I think that the riparian habitat along most of the streams in our basin is in fair condition. In some areas it's great. In some areas it's not very good at all. People in those areas have cleared land right down to the stream bank, and that creates a problem because there's no filtering mechanism for pollutants that are washing off the land, and it also destabilizes the bank.
The greatest threat to water quality in the San Antonio River is what we call non-point source pollution. And what that means is all of the variety of pollutants that come from land, streets, stormwater. Anytime that it rains, the rain falls on a piece of property, and then if they've fertilized or they have pet waste or hydrocarbons on the street or other sources of bacteria that maybe had been spilled out on the street, all of that washes into the San Antonio River and all the tributaries. And believe it or not, the combined pollution from those non-point sources really provides a substantial threat to the health of the San Antonio River. We have found fish kills after rain events, particularly when it hasn't rained for a long time, and all those various pollutants build up on the streets and on the yards and everywhere throughout our community. And then when the rain comes and then you have this first flush go into the river, we've found dead fish, we've had spikes in bacteria that will last for about 5 days. And it is a tremendous threat to the ability for the river to sustain long term.
San Antonio River is important to Wilson County for the fact that it provides opportunity for recreation and parks along the way. Also, it's to remove the wastewater from the area that each one of the cities incur. It's very important that all communities work together for the quality and the flow of the river. The upstream users of the river has a great effect on the amount of water in time of drought that's used for irrigation. Also has a great to do with the flooding and how the water is managed up north and throughout the area. Wilson County and the San Antonio River has worked closely in many projects. Most notably, as of late, was the mapping in the flood area. They've worked to maintain some of the parks in the county. It's been a very good working relationship in so many ways. With garbage pickup, the river authorities assisted the county it's given us an opportunity to lessen the pollution on the river by having things that would ordinarily may end up in the river being picked up in a proper and professional way.
The river is not political, but there's a lot of politics involved in making sure that our river stays clean. San Antonio River Authority is out there taking care of those type of issues for us, the ones that use the river, the ones who live on the river. They make sure that all the T's are crossed, that all the laws are met, and that we go one step further in making sure that our river, the San Antonio, is the best that it can be. When you look at the watershed of the San Antonio River, the importance of knowing that what you are doing in your own environment affects more than others, that's more than stewardship. That's taking care of what's going to be going on for hundreds of years beyond us. It's most important that we bring back native grasses, and that we take care of the log jams, but the livestock and the wildlife that depend on the water. You've got to make sure that Mother Nature is taken care of on every creek.
I think most people in Karnes County are pretty indifferent to the river. As I stated before, there's not a whole lot of public access to the river, and so they're not really that interested in it. Unfortunately, I've been told it's considered a muddy stream or San Antonio sewer water, but we hope to change that perception in the future.
A regional park planning group began efforts in 2005 that led to the opening of the Goliad Paddling Trail in 2007, Branch River Park in Goliad in 2011, and in 2012 to the 100-acre Helton San Antonio River Nature Park near Floresville and the Suspamco Paddling Trail. Also planned is a linear trail system along Escondido Creek in Kennedy.
To do projects in the San Antonio watershed, we need the cooperation of the community. And to do the things that they want us to do, we need to have their input. I know on the Escondido Creek Watershed Project, we've had many community meetings so far to find out what the people want. In the past, the same thing happened with the dams along Escondido Creek. It was determined that there was a need, and community involvement helped that.
My perception of the San Antonio River watershed on this community is it's a very valuable asset to have the river here. It provides recreation, it provides its normal water flow functions such as carrying sediment to the river and your floodplain sediment. It's just a wonderful, if it's functioning properly, serves as a sponge to absorb water into the watershed, the catchment. So it's really important for this community. It sustains cattle ranching and agriculture and recreation, so it's multi-purpose.
There are certainly some small interest groups here that have a very special interest in the San Antonio River, the quality of the water, how it flows, the impact it has downstream on the bays.
The San Antonio River provides tremendous opportunity for recreational enjoyment. First off, of course, we have wonderful trails that folks can walk or ride bikes or take a stroller with their family to enjoy the beauty of the river. There's also now the opportunity for paddling that we recently added to the San Antonio River, which we're very excited about, because the more that people can interact with the river, we believe the more that people are going to want to protect it and make sure that it can continue to be a vital resource to the area. So now, both downtown, right south of downtown San Antonio, you can put a canoe in and enjoy paddling on a very small stretch here outside of our offices. And then there's more of an opportunity as you move downstream. With the Mission Reach project, we've added canoe chutes to get through some of the riffle structures that we've added in the Mission Reach. Now people can enjoy paddling through that section, and that will ultimately go for 8 miles downstream. And then down in our southern basin, we added a paddling trail, which we call the Saspamco Paddling Trail, which is basically goes from southern Bexar County into Wilson County and has 2 takeout points, one at a facility that we call right now County Road 125 site, which we just recently purchased, and we'll be developing that into a park environment. But people can take out their canoes there, or they can go all the way down to our Helton Nature Park, which is down in Wilson County, which is another wonderful opportunity to canoe and take your boats out and have eventually camping and other wonderful opportunities to enjoy the river and all of its ecosystem. We also have paddling down in Goliad County. There's been paddling down there for quite some time. The community came up with the Canoe Trail Goliad is a stakeholder committee down in Goliad, and they established a canoe trail several years ago that is very popular.
It provides a variety of different recreational activities, from fishing to canoeing and kayaking.
Sarah has been involved in Goliad in a number of ways, beginning with assisting with the development of water supplies and water and wastewater treatment in Goliad, but Sarah's also been involved with recreation, creating recreation through the Branch River property and the Canoe Trail Goliad. In doing so, Sarah has been involved in assisting with the wastewater treatment plant in the city of Goliad to assist them in preventing wastewater overflow or spill that could ultimately end up in the river. Sarah has been involved in collection of litter and tires and things like that we don't want to have end up in the river. And Sarah's also been involved in educating people about thinking before you discard medication, for example. Medication goes down the toilet and can end up in our riverway. And so we have been involved in providing those kinds of information briefs and projects to assist in that. The connection between the San Antonio River, Northern Reach, the entire reach, and the Gulf Coast is tremendous. It's like separating body parts. They all work together. And as an avid fisherman and water recreationist, it's real important to me that we be aware of what's going on upstream, because it all ends up downstream. The bay is a critical body of water, and as long as the river feeds that bay, what happens upstream affects what happens downstream. It affects the wildlife, it affects the birds, it affects fish that live in it, crabs, everything. And if that water becomes polluted, if it's not available, it can have tremendous effect downstream.
The San Antonio River provides a tremendous amount of freshwater inflow to the San Antonio Bay system, which is an estuary dependent upon the mixing of freshwater from the rivers and saltwater from the ocean. So it is a tremendous resource to have that kind of flow into the San Antonio Bay system. The San Antonio Bay system includes an area that is the home of the last wild flock of the endangered whooping crane. The whooping crane is kind of the icon of this area, in fact. And the whooping crane largely depends on species like blue crabs for its food sources. Blue crabs are an estuarine species. An estuary is a mixing zone between saltwater and freshwater. The freshwater inflows that come down via the San Antonio River and the Guadalupe River create a very dynamic system in terms of nutrients and sediments and things that support the species like blue crabs. Without that freshwater inflow, we wouldn't have a healthy estuary system. Healthy estuary system means that we can support the whooping crane populations as well as other species that also depend on this estuary. Recreation, again, is a way to get people out in the environment, and when you're in the environment, you typically learn to appreciate it. The San Antonio River system provides all kinds of opportunities for people to get out and enjoy it. It helps us encourage what we call, or I call, the headwaters to tidewaters approach to management. The whole watershed, which ends here at the bay, is important, and each person's actions in protecting that watershed is important.
At SARA, we define sustainability from the perspective of how land and water interact. And we do that because we want people to understand how what they do on the land has an impact on water quality as well as on water quantity. From a water quality perspective, the runoff can have pollutants in it. The increased impervious cover can provide threats from a flood control perspective because water runs faster over concrete and other impervious surfaces than it would if it was a naturally vegetated area. So we want people to start to understand how those two things interact. We've had a lot of development in our watershed, and the way that the topography is in our watershed is the more that you do in Bexar County from a development perspective has an adverse effect downstream because of the topography changes that we have. We're in what we're called flash flood alley. So any impervious cover or solid surfaces that are developed here really have a more of an impact downstream than maybe you would see in other communities. The topography change is not as significant as we have here. We're trying to educate developers about maybe thinking about when they develop their property to put in more green space, to use their vegetation in a functional way versus just in an aesthetic way. We're trying to get people who develop residential areas to not think about always having to put curbs in, but rather having the opportunity for water to maybe go down a street and then percolate into a rain garden or into a median or something like that, because that, if it does that, then you're not only taking out the pollutants, but you're also slowing down the water and taking out the volume of the water that's also flowing.
One of the goals of this citizens blueprint for the future that we call SA 2020 is to encourage sustainable development. And what better place, public space, to focus on than the San Antonio River. This is about how do we ensure that we have a great watershed in the future, that it's clean, that as housing is developed there, that we have sustainable development, environmentally friendly development. So it's important, and San Antonians demand that their elected officials and the development community be responsible stewards of our natural resources, particularly the San Antonio River.
The River Improvements Project has enabled the citizens of San Antonio, first of all, to go to areas of the river, along the San Antonio River, that they had not been able to go to in many, many years, because some of the areas were just, they looked like a dump, and now they're just absolutely gorgeous. It's hard to believe how much it has been transformed. And then secondly, the tourists, when they visit San Antonio, just fall in love with the San Antonio River and all the amenities. It's got some art projects along the museum reach, beautiful trees, beautiful landscaping, and so when you're walking, you forget how the distance that you've covered, because it's just so enjoyable as you get to know San Antonio.
Extension of the Riverwalk into derelict sections of the river was a primary effort of San Antonio Mayor Phil Hardberger. 70 years after construction began on Robert Hugman's Riverwalk, the first section of the 2-mile museum reach to the north opened in 2009. 2 years of construction had cleared the channel and built walkways along beautified banks of improvements along a museum reach that ultimately leads from the original northern end of the Riverwalk 4 more miles to the Whitty Museum in Brackenridge Park.
It's been a great privilege to witness firsthand the fantastic changes along the river over the last 10 years, beginning with downtown reach, the extraordinarily dramatic museum reach, and now the beautiful and bountiful mission reach that links the missions to the river downtown and then up to here at the Whitty Museum to realize that soon we'll be able to walk, if we have a lot of energy, the 15 miles from Mission Espada at the Missions to the Whitty Museum at the top of the museum reach. This is an exceptional development, and we're witnessing it. And someday people will take it for granted, but it's great to watch it grow.
9 works of unique public art created for the museum reach were underwritten by private funds raised by the San Antonio River Foundation, formed in 2003 by the River Authority.
The San Antonio River Foundation has accomplished a lot of great things in the 9 years that we have been operating. We celebrate 10 years next year. But some of the major accomplishments have been along the museum reach, with raising $12 million from the private sector and corporations to be able to commission some world-famous artists to have their art installations. And so that made a huge difference. You don't see a lot of public art along a river and under bridges. And so that's one of the big ones. The other one has been that we are reaching out to the community to encourage them to come down to the river and to be physically fit and walk and bike and share some family time.
The Mission Reach will likewise extend the Riverwalk from the southern end of the original Riverwalk, topping off a complex of walking, hiking, and canoeing trails that makes San Antonio's Riverwalk one of the nation's finest linear parks.
Well, what happened in the 50s, 60s, the Corps of Army Engineers came down and, for flood protection, channelized the river going south, destroyed the natural environment that was on this river when I grew up. So when we've come back now to restore it, it's a very unique project. 25,000 trees, grasses, shrubs, everything that was grown here in Texas is coming up on this river. Wildlife has come back. All sorts of different birds, from herons to every kind of bird you can think of. Fish back in the river. So it is the largest environmental restoration of an urban river in the United States. We ought to be very, very proud of that.
Coming down the river a little bit into Karnes and Wilson County, what we're dealing with here is with the oil and gas, our energy production. I'd like to see a safety net around our native waters. Our watershed affects our well water that many of us still drink from.
The San Antonio River Authority has been real helpful with developing Jackson Nature Park for the county. It's just used as a nature park right now. There's probably not all that much attendance at this time, but there are some, which is important.
In terms of the water, it's been very important since the San Antonio River Authority came into existence in cleaning up the water. It used to be like an open sewer. And right now the River Authority has done a great job of making tremendous progress toward cleaning up the quality of the water. I think as that happens, I think that you might see the return to swimming in the river, because right now people don't really swim in the river. I think you'll see the return to swimming in the river. I think you'll see an increase in canoeing. We would love to see a canoe trail from San Antonio to Goliad.
The river is really important. If you can get people on the river through the paddling trail or fishing, any of those activities, it helps them to appreciate what we have. And the more you use it, the more you begin to care for it. And if you care for something, you can become a steward because it's something that you value. And you really have to value that before you can really care for it and want to protect it and preserve what you have. So it's really key to get people out there to see that. Many people don't have that opportunity to get down on that river, and it makes a big difference once you actually can get on the river and see it.
In the future, I think another thing that it would be great if this region really thought more holistically about how our water resources are managed from a regional perspective. We've been very good as it relates to groundwater from the Edwards Aquifer and how that resource, because over the decades, everyone has become so intimately familiar with the interaction of the aquifer, and everyone watches the level of the aquifer so that they know when they can water their yards and all of that. I would love in the future for people to have that kind of knowledge with the San Antonio River, with the health of the San Antonio River. They're going to be concerned about what the level of bacteria is in the river, and they want to watch that, and they want to make sure that we as a community don't have any segments of the San Antonio River that are impaired or are on the EPA's 303D list, that means something to people to have all of our water, our rivers and creeks be to a standard that is considered clean and healthy. That would be something that I think would be a wonderful shift in the way that people think about the San Antonio River, and be as concerned about that as they are the health of the Edwards Aquifer.
I never thought that we were going to get to where we are at now. And I see nothing but good things for the future, you know. And I just hope and pray that I live long enough to see it, and that may God grant the River Authority the vision and the resources to do this project once and for all. And I say, hurry up.
In 50 years, the trees that are along the banks will be at full maturity. I will be an old retired man, but it will be a project that will be for ages to come.
The staff at the San Antonio River Foundation hopes that 20, 30 years from now, that the kids, the grandkids, are down enjoying the San Antonio River. They know so much about it that they treasure it as much as their parents and grandparents did, that they visit it on a regular basis, and that they become great stewards.
In 20 or 30 years from now, my vision for the San Antonio watershed would be that we would take this precious water from the San Antonio River and provide it to the fields, for example, like our San Juan demonstration farm, and that we will be producing crops that will make their way back into the community through not just our demonstration farm, but community plots and maybe even parish plots, and have organizations like the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts come in and help us farm these fields as they were done 260 years ago. I would also hope that in 20 to 30 years from now that we would appreciate the San Antonio River for what it gives us in terms of the water that we need to survive as a community. And as a result of that, I hope that our planning efforts in terms of what we do and how we impact the river, whether it be through not using so many pesticides and going more back to organic farming and lessening that impact to the waters of the San Antonio River, so that the life that it gives us, that we would be able to give it back by being good stewards and doing what we need to preserve and protect that San Antonio watershed.
Well, as we move forward, I think there's no doubt at all that the economic impact on San Antonio's economy is going to keep increasing due to the San Antonio River. For example, in the museum reach, we now see that many new developments are being really started near the river or on the river.
These next few years, during the redevelopment of Hemisphere and the link that's going to be created between the river and Hemisphere and the convention center, we're going to get to see just an exciting coming together of each of these important public spaces for San Antonio.
So the San Antonio watershed, again, is interesting because it is an urban watershed. And I think if you look at the river, which you're going to see close to the river, kind of in all directions, is really kind of a thriving sort of downtown, just north of downtown, a kind of urban residential neighborhood, a place that people in San Antonio are living and loving, and that becomes a real model of how you live near a resource that really is this small and this delicate. As you kind of go south, really for the river to be back like a river, and for it to go through the national park, with the missions right now being nominated as World Heritage Sites, I think that really is going to focus on where San Antonio came from, how it developed, our real history, but it's also going to be this amazing recreational asset. You see so many people there now already running. When this thing is finished and you have bikes, running, canoeing, it's really going to be the heart of this kind of urban park that everyone is going to focus on and really enjoy coming to.
Well, what you see now behind me is the early stage of the restoration of this river. In a very short while, you're going to see grasses along the side. You're going to see hundreds of trees behind me, among the 25,000 that we're planting. You're going to see natural grasses along this stretch of the river, natural plants. So it's going to be absolutely beautiful. Now, those trees are going to take maybe 20, 30 years to reach its full height. So if you could be here 30 years from now, you'd probably see the most beautiful scene around the river, but it's absolutely going to be great just in the initial stages of it.
In 20 or 30 years, I see the San Antonio River Authority and the river basin being a role model to all river authorities. I hope that the water will be ready for contact sports, for swimming, besides kayaking, and I feel that this river authority will be a model for all river authorities across the United States, and that is my hope.
Well, goodness, for the next 20 or 30 years, what do we see in store for the San Antonio River Authority and Cibolo Creek? It's endless possibilities as the water becomes cleaner and the more recreation, more water, in fact. I see opportunities for the recreation along the San Antonio River and the Cibolo.
The water has always been, but it is becoming more and more important. As population grows, the needs for water grows, the oil and gas industry is using a lot of water. And then we have the natural environment, the little animals that live in the bay and the estuary, live in the river. We have to balance those needs. And in order to balance those needs, we have to understand what those needs are.
My vision for the San Antonio River watershed in the future is that we still have flowing water and that we try to sustain the river as it is at least and try to protect and keep it in its most natural condition as possible 50 years from now, and that we don't totally clear cut the banks or let the river go dry because of all the interest taking water out of the river. So my vision is that that river at least stays like it is and as natural as possible.
20 or 30 years down the road, the clean water is going to become even more vital to not only this area, but the entire state. If we don't have water, then we're not going to have economic growth and development in the state of Texas and in this area of the state, either one. So we need to work on projects that is going to capture some of the water that comes down the San Antonio River. It's very vital for the economic well-being of our state and area.
Well, I hope in 20 or 30 years that we will have gotten to the point where we've moved beyond some of the contentious issues that we're dealing with now, that we've developed a plan and are actually implementing parts of that plan to protect and restore and enhance this system, that people are still involved, that they are supporting these projects, that we have a group of people who are out here doing things themselves, taking part in activities, and just enjoying what is then a very healthy San Antonio Bay system.
I am delighted to be on the San Antonio River Authority Board of Directors while SARA is celebrating its 75th anniversary. And what I think is really one of the culminations of SARA's achievements is this whole San Antonio River Improvements Project, which has been a collaboration with the city, the county, the San Antonio River Foundation, and SARA. And it has been that collaboration and cooperation that has enabled us to do this. And I think San Antonio has been very good at working at collaborative projects. Not one entity, not one person can do it all by themselves, but by joining forces, joining monies, joining expertise, working together, we have been able to accomplish a miracle.
I'm personally proud to be a member of the SARA Board of Directors and feel like I just happen to be here. It's coincidence that I'm here on the 75th anniversary. That honor belongs to everyone that has served before me and serves with me. And so I believe that we've all done a good job and we've all worked together to be the organization that it is today on this 75th year. I just happen to be sitting in this place now.
20 to 30 years from now, I'd like to see that we are all aware of how we are all affecting our river and our watershed. It's not just us, it is our kids, it's the energy production here in Texas for the future, and therefore it's globally.
When I started working here in 1987, water quality in the San Antonio River, just downstream of San Antonio, was pretty bad. And I've seen major improvements in that water quality. And I'm hoping that 30 or 40 years from now, we'll continue to see huge improvements. We haven't answered the issue with E. coli bacteria. We haven't really started seriously addressing nutrient issues. I'm hoping that in 20 or 30 years, those issues will have been addressed, identified, and dealt with. I'm hoping that we'll have new, better, faster methods to look at a lot more different things, because water quality is always going to be an issue, and I'm hoping that this agency will be at the forefront always of addressing that.
The San Antonio River has given us a thriving ecosystem, but people are not always kind to the river. Trash and pollution is ugly and harmful. So visit sara-tx.org to learn how we can work to protect the river and be watershed wise.